Everyone's got a JRPG that they hate. But what if I told you that some of the most mocked, some of the most trashed, and some of the most memed games in the genre might actually be worth your time? I picked 10 JRPGs that most fans love to hate, and I'm going to convince you to give them another chance. So join me as we shine a positive light on these games that are widely known to be the worst the genre has to offer. With that being said, let's jump right into it, and I think the only way to start is with one of the most controversial entries. To start off today, we have Kingdom Hearts 3, released for the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One in 2019, and later on released for the PC and Nintendo Switch. Well, kinda released on Switch. Ever thought that cloud ports were a good idea? Yeah, that's beside the point though. That has nothing to do with today's video. Kingdom Hearts 3 is widely criticized for being one of those games that got announced far too early way back in 2013 and built up expectations only to disappoint nearly every single fan with its supposed closure of the story. It also removed the one thing that made Kingdom Hearts, the integration of Square Enix and Disney with the use of Final Fantasy characters. There were no Final Fantasy cameos, no references to Final Fantasy characters in past games, and worst of all, there was no Sephiroth Superboss, which had been a staple since the very first Kingdom Hearts. It went from this series that was known as a Disney Final Fantasy crossover to just a simple Disney action RPG. Not to mention, the game was insanely easy, even on Proud Mode. It's no surprise that people were disappointed after waiting 6 years for the game to finally get released. With all this being said, why should you play it? Well, for all of its shortcomings, the combat system is great. It's flashy and just incredibly fun. Sure, it's been dumbed down a little from Kingdom Hearts 2, but it's still super enjoyable. Beyond that, the game looks gorgeous and has a whole lot of content, with more content in the form of a post-game boss rush with organization members, additional difficulties, and easy or pro codes. Easy codes can do things like triple your party's attack and magic stats, or make the cooking minigame incredibly simple. Or you can use the pro codes to make the game harder and give things like one-hit deaths. And lastly, while all the actual Kingdom Hearts lore and story is locked to the first and final chapter, there is still an emotional payoff if you've actually spent time playing each and every main and side Kingdom Hearts game. Honestly, I found it kinda better just to view this game as a tribute as opposed to a finale of the series, especially considering once you finish the game, you do get a teaser for Kingdom Hearts 4. Sure, it's not the best game in the series, and it's kind of a mess, but it's still a fun game and worth playing. So, what would happen if you took Final Fantasy and crossed it over with a random movie? You'd totally choose Charlie's Angels, right? But wait, let's make it even more crazy and throw in a splash of J-pop. That's what Square Enix decided to do with Final Fantasy X-2. Originally released in 2003, Final Fantasy X-2 was the direct sequel to Final Fantasy X, the one game that to this day people still claim as one of the best games in the franchise. Final Fantasy X-2 is often thrown aside as being too silly, with the serious and mission-focused Yuna being turned into a pop singer and having the personality of a carefree high school girl in love. Or the fact that the story is a huge downgrade from the incredible story that the original Final Fantasy X offered, devolving it into something bordering a bad fanfiction. The tone did a complete 180, and as a result, this game is constantly talked about as being one of the most disappointing games that Square Enix has ever released. However, while I don't disagree with the aspects of the tonal shift or the story, one thing that makes Final Fantasy X-2 worth replaying is its battle system. I've mentioned it time and time again. I adore job systems, and Final Fantasy X-2 has to have one of the most amazing job systems available. The combat is turn-based, but it's fast-paced. You can set job loadouts before battle, and depending on the grid you decide you want to use, it can add certain abilities by traveling from job to job on that grid during battle. It adds a bit of extra strategy in not only choosing the appropriate job for the situation, but multiple jobs so that you can have one character fulfill several different roles if the situation requires it. Honestly, if you're someone that prioritizes gameplay over story, you need to give Final Fantasy X-2 another shot. Final Fantasy X-2 is the perfect example of a game that got judged unfairly at launch. It's lighter hearted for sure, but it doesn't mean it's a bad game by any means.
Let's go.
Xenosaga Episode II, released in 2004 by Namco for the PlayStation 2, might just be the most divisive middle entry in a JRPG trilogy ever made. It's the awkward phase of the Xenosaga series. While the first entry wasn't the best and it had a certain style that kept everyone interested, Xenosaga Episode II changed everything. The battle system, while quite a bit faster, became a trial and error break zone combo system, which just led to you using a guide for every single boss fight, and that art style became awful. The original models were sharp and anime stylized, while Xenosaga Episode II uses strange realistic style with dull colors, and it just looked terrible. I fully understand why this game more or less killed off the Xenosaga trilogy. Fun fact, did you know that Xenosaga was originally supposed to be 6 games? But after Xenosaga Episode II was so poorly received, Namco decided to close off the series with a 3rd game and combine all the plot ends into that one game, which is why it seems a bit convoluted. But we aren't here to talk about Xenosaga Episode 3, are we? I'm here to try and convince you to give Xenosaga Episode 2 another shot and why it's worth playing. Now, it still has the same pacing issues that Xenosaga is known for. Hour-long cutscenes, followed by a save point, and then another hour-long cutscene, and then you get minimal gameplay. There's a reason people consider it more of a movie than an actual game. But this is actually kind of why I loved it as much as I did. Xenosaga Episode 2's story dives into the backstory of Junior and Albedo, as well as their relationship. It also dives into Albedo's descent into madness and actually makes you care about him and realize he kind of has a reason for being as insane as he is. There's also the story between Junior, Negredo, and Momo. It's heartbreaking and some of the most human storytelling in any science fiction JRPG, period. The story alone is what makes Xenosaga Episode 2 worth playing. To this day, I find Albedo's villain arc to be the best villain arc in any media, period. Seriously, just tough out this game. It might not be the best, but it's worth it because it makes Xenosaga Episode 3 hit that much harder once you do, even if that game is a condensed mess of a story. Yeah, I know. I've hated on Tales of Zestiria left and right. In fact, it did make my list of biggest gaming regrets. Check that out after you're done here if you want to hear me go into detail why I disliked it. Released in 2015, Tales of Zestiria is often criticized as being amongst one of the worst Tales games to ever exist. It's got one of the weakest protagonists in the entire franchise. It has some questionable story twists. The backtracking is a nightmare. Then you have the gear and skill system that is far more convoluted than it needs to be. That also includes an element of RNG. Then there's the betrayal with the whole Alicia controversy. She was advertised in all the promo material as the main heroine of the game, only to be replaced with Rose just a few hours in. Now, I don't mind Rose. In fact, she's a pretty good character, but when you're looking forward to Alicia, it felt a bit dishonest by Bandai Namco. It's way more frustrating than it has to be, but it can't be entirely bad, right? For all the negative aspects that Tales of Zestiria presents, personally, I love the art direction it has. It's bright, it's colorful, and the world is actually big and beautiful. The battle mechanics are fun, and being able to fuse with your party through armatization added entirely new movesets. I've complained about how it feels forced later on in the game and how it cuts your party down to 2 from the standard of 4, but genuinely, it's a fun mechanic. Beyond the combat, the characters are actually amazing. Sure, Soraya is bland, but it's made up with the supporting cast. Mikleo, Edna, and Rose more than make up for it. Mikleo is one of my favorite characters, and I loved Edna's sass. Besides, Tales of Berseria is a prequel to it, which is one of the most loved Tales games, so you need to get that backstory. Sure, you can just watch Tales of Zestiria X, the anime adaptation, but I still feel like Tales of Zestiria deserves a playthrough because of how it's still a Tales game, and every Tales game deserves to be played at one point or another. Tales of Zestiria is definitely a flawed game, but it's far from worthless. You all know about Quest 64, don't you? Released in 1998 for the Nintendo 64, also known as Holy Magic Century, which admittedly is a much cooler name. Quest 64 is basically the meme of the JRPG community. This is essentially the only JRPG available on the N64. Sure, there are a few other ones, but no one really pays attention to them, and Quest 64 only gets attention because of how awful it is. It's kind of the JRPG equivalent of store brand cereal. It's bland, it's generic, and probably not your first choice, but it still somehow made it into your house. The story is paper thin, the characters, they barely even exist, and there's almost no dialogue. It's JRPG in name only, but with all this being said, why should you even waste your time with it? Well, the magic system is kind of cool. You find these magical wisps all around the world and you use these to build up each of the 4 elements and gain new spells. And it uses a saga-like system for leveling up. You don't gain traditional experience, but you gain stats based on how you act. Power up your fire by using fire spells, or gain HP by being damaged. It was unique and it added a bit of fun. The music was soothing and gave a great feeling as you traveled through one of the earliest 3D open worlds available. Sure, the gameplay got a bit bland though, because later on it's just casting the same spells over and over, or casting a spell to nullify all magic damage, which kinda makes you invincible because every single attack used by enemies is a magic attack. But honestly, I did enjoy my time with it. It might not be a good game by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a nice look to see how games have evolved since it's been released. Look at it in a nostalgic lens as a time capsule, and I think you'll have a fun time playing through it. Besides, it's only like 15 hours tops, so you're looking at a nice casual experience to play through those 100-hour juggernauts. Looking at you, Atlas.
We don't panic, we'll win. Hey, don't waste this chance.
Infinite Undiscovery is a game where the title alone makes it sound like a red flag. It's been 17 years and the name Infinite Undiscovery still makes absolutely no sense to me. It's almost like Square Enix randomly decided to select the title from an online buzzword generator and then just rolled with it. Released in 2008 for the Xbox 360, Infinite Undiscovery was strangely ambitious in all of the weirdest ways. The voice acting is comical, the gameplay is strangely slow for an action RPG and almost feels like you're trying to herd cats during a hurricane. The characters are kind of a mixed bag. Some are lovable, and then some of them you just want to toss in a meat grinder. And the story feels incredibly rushed, with some of the scenes not getting the love they deserve. However, with all of this typical tri-ace jank, I still think it deserves to be played. It had some interesting concepts for a game, such as real-time world events and on-the-fly character switching. The music is also amazingly well done for a game that kind of vanished into obscurity. The combat does get fun once you get used to it, and the story, while rushed, is actually really decent. You get to play as Capel, this flute-playing pacifist who gets mistaken for a legendary warrior. He wants absolutely no part of anything, so seeing his journey is actually kind of amusing. Though having a beautiful world ripe for exploration, and maybe the lack of decent JRPGs on the 360 at the time, made me enjoy this game for all of the jank it had. Unfortunately, if you do want to give it a shot, you'll have to break out the Xbox because it hasn't been ported anywhere. This is an ongoing trend for JRPGs on the 360 that has yet to be rectified. Infinite Undiscovery is definitely a worthwhile game, and it gets way more hate than it deserves, even if its name still makes no sense whatsoever and will probably never be deciphered.
Ha! Shield of water.
Earthen spear. Next. Good one.
When you think about games that have abysmal voice acting, what games come to mind? Trails of Cold Steel? Zelda's Adventure? What about Arc Rise Fantasia? Released for the Wii in 2010 by Marvelous Entertainment, Arc Rise Fantasia has a lot of undeserved hate. The game is phenomenal, but gets hated on solely because of its voice acting, and the people look at it as if the whole game is a joke because of that. Sure, it was on the Wii, which seemed to have the vibe of a kiddie console to a lot of people, so maybe that's why people didn't look at it seriously. Regardless, Arc Rise Fantasia deserves a second look for so many reasons. Literally, the only thing that isn't amazing with this game is the voice acting. It's infamously bad. I don't mean, haha, English voice acting is bad, I mean early 2000s anime bad. What were they thinking bad? Voice acting that makes you physically cringe every time you hear it. Some lines are incredibly flat. Some just don't match the tension of the scene. The voice acting of this game has hit legendary status because of how terrible it is. However, if you're like me and you love awful voice acting, this is just another positive.
Ah! Help me! I don't want to die! Help me, Mr. Lark!
I suppose the visuals could be another negative, as they do look a bit dated, but this game came out way back in 2010. That was 15 years ago. Come on now. That can hardly be considered a negative in this day and age. Arc Rise Fantasia has a fantastic traditional turn-based battle system, somewhat similar to Skies of Arcadia's AP system, and a very unique skill system. The open world is absolutely gorgeous. Everybody's always begging for world maps. Well, this game has that. If I had to describe Arc Rise Fantasia as anything, honestly, I would compare it to the Tales series if it was a turn-based JRPG. It has the same vibe and the same energy as the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 Tales games, which in retrospect is probably why I loved it as much as I did. Arc Rise Fantasia probably could have used a bit of polish, but it's a game that any turn-based RPG fan cannot miss. And besides, if you really can't stand the voice acting, you could always use the Japanese dub, but don't. You don't mess with perfection that Arc Rise Fantasia's English dub provides. What is it with tries and their weird game titles? Seriously, Star Ocean, what does it even mean? Okay, I'm joking about that. But for real, integrity and faithlessness, that's far too long and it just sounds awkward. Anyways, Star Ocean Integrity and Faithlessness, released in 2016, is the 5th entry in the franchise, and this game gets an unfathomable amount of hate. I can be completely honest, most of it is deserved. It is by far the weakest game in the franchise, and it made so many mistakes and very awkward choices. The cutscenes take place in real time and had very little impact. The pacing is awful. The backtracking was asinine and far too frequent. And you can tell this game had a very small budget and had very little effort put into it. It's a Star Ocean game. There's supposed to be space travel. Why are you on a single planet the whole time? What a load of garbage. Wait, hold on a minute. I'm supposed to be selling you on this game, aren't I? Why am I just sending this game through the proverbial feces processing plant? Let's talk about what makes this game worth playing and why it deserves a second chance. Well, everything I said is very true. At its core, Integrity and Faithlessness is a Star Ocean game. And if you grew up playing games like Second Story or Till the End of Time, it will feel incredibly familiar and give you a sense of nostalgia. The battle system is absolute chaos, with all 7 party members going nuts all at the same time. And it brings back the item creation and customization system that the series is known for. And it lets you settle that god complex of being overpowered that every one of us JRPG players has. It's also a very short game, so if you need something with a fun sci-fi story between longer games, play Star Ocean 5. It's only 30 hours, and it's fun enough to kill a week or so. It's easily the worst game in the franchise, and that includes Blue Sphere on the Game Boy Color, but if you're a Star Ocean fan and want something simple and fun, go in not expecting much and pick up Integrity and Faithlessness. You might really enjoy it if you don't expect something of AAA quality.
Come forth, thunder of the gods! What the heck is that? It ends here! Indignation!
That has to be one of the most legendary opening sequences to any JRPG ever. Sure, legendary because of how terrible it is, but it's legendary all the same. Tales of Fantasia was originally released on the Super Famicom in 1995, and it is the very first entry in the Tales franchise. Possibly one of my favorite entries in the franchise. However, we are talking about the Game Boy Advance localization of Tales of Fantasia, released in 2006. The sad part is that this is the only official localization of the game. The Game Boy Advance version of Tales of Fantasia has so many issues, easily apparent from even the intro cutscene. The voice acting is terrible and sounds like it was recorded using a tin can. The animations are dumbed down. The game in itself is incredibly slow. And lastly, and possibly the worst, is the translation is terrible. Like, I ran the entire script through Google Translate terrible. Do you remember the legendary Norse Battle of the Gods? What? No, not the Ragnarok. That's entirely wrong. I'm talking about the Battle of the Gods, Kangaroo. Yeah, the translation is an absolute nightmare. However, that being said, the game is still worthwhile to play. First of all, it's the only official localization of the game, so if you want to support the Tales series, this is the only way to do so with Fantasia. It also has more content as opposed to the original Super Famicom version, such as Chester's Elven Bow and the deeper Moria Gallery dungeon. There's also the fact that you need to play Fantasia as a whole. This is the beginning of the greatest JRPG series of all time. And if you love the later games in the series, I believe you should play the game that introduced the franchise. Now, with all of that being said, I'm going to go ahead and say something that I probably shouldn't say with this video's topic. Don't play the GBA version. I know that's weird to say considering I'm trying to convince you to play mediocre games. Tales of Fantasia on Game Boy Advance is fun for a silly and not at all serious experience of Fantasia, but if you haven't played Fantasia and you want to play the game in its best form, but you only speak English, play the fan translation on the PlayStation. It's better in every aspect and probably the best way to play it in English. However, if you want to play it on Game Boy Advance, it's still fun, but play it with the right mindset, or just to compare it to other releases in the franchise. Lastly, we're here to talk about Alundra 2. Do you remember Alundra? It was Sony's answer to Zelda, an action-adventure game with tough-as-nails puzzles and that working designs translation. It was loved by all, so naturally you'd want to build on that and release a sequel. Enter Alundra 2, A New Legend Begins, released in 2000 for the original PlayStation. Personally, when I had first played this game, I hadn't played the original Alundra, so I loved Alundra 2. I thought it was great. So I was a bit surprised when I heard people being unhappy with it. They didn't like it at all. The game isn't bad at all. Sure, it's silly with awkward humor, but it's not bad. Then a few years later, I played the original Alundra, and I finally understood it. Alundra 2 was an incredible shift. The difficult puzzles were now gone. The tone was substantially changed, and this was a game full of humor where it just made fun of itself, and the change to 3D didn't help either. With that being said, just because it isn't Alundra, it doesn't make the game bad. This is a decent Zelda-like game, and it still has some puzzles. They aren't nearly as difficult as the original, but I still really enjoyed solving them. Then the characters are goofy and fun to interact with. I feel like Alundra 2 deserves to be judged on its own merit as opposed to being compared to the original Alundra. I can understand the feeling of betrayal when you play Alundra 2 after loving Alundra, but don't judge it on that. Yes, the game isn't Alundra 1, but it isn't trash either. Standalone, it's an incredible blast if you don't take it too seriously. Besides, if you don't like the game, just play darts for hours on end, because for some reason they decided to include a darts minigame, which is far more addictive than it has any right to be. What I wouldn't give to have a remaster of these two games. Maybe one day. Maybe one day. So there you have it. Were any of these actually good, or am I just clinging to nostalgia? I want to hear your thoughts. Drop your own bad JRPG you secretly love that you think people need to play. I'd love some suggestions on what so-called bad game I should play next. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to like this video, sub to the channel, and share this with someone who still thinks Quest 64 is actually a perfect game. And before you head off, check out this video where I go over modern games that I regret buying. This has been Shinky, thanks so much for watching, and until next week's video, have a wonderful day.